All right, welcome back to the Business of Social podcast powered by STN Digital. I'm David Brickley, and on the Business of Social, we examine the digital marketing industry and analyze how brands successfully increase their ad revenue and brand affinity through cutting-edge content on social. In short, we talk to the experts so you're able to keep your thumb on the pulse of the ever-changing landscape of social and digital media. She's the Senior Manager of Operations of the Brand Marketing and Digital Strategy at Dick Clark Productions. Over at DCP, they produce events like the American Music Awards, Golden Globes, Billboard Music Awards, Academy of Country Music Awards, just to name a few. I am pleased to be joined by Madeline Mesevage. Madeline, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here.
So we were just talking before the show, but I want you to break down your role. I know in this industry, all of our roles change every 6 months, it seems, with all the different social networks and algorithm changes and all that. So break down your day-to-day at Dick Clark Productions for me.
Starting off with the tough ones. My actual role, so I, like you said, I'm in the brand marketing and digital strategy department. So our department handles a large part of sort of the content creation that happens for digital and social purposes. We handle the marketing around the events. Obviously, we work with the network and partners to do that. But then we also handle all of the sort of brand ideation and then execution around our event. So my role specifically is to handle the strategy behind the content that we're creating, and then the operations for sort of all these moving pieces to make sure everything can actually happen around each event. So long story short, my actual day-to-day is ever-changing. It's sort of depending on the cycle, right? We think our years exist in cycles, and our cycles are really driven by the show season and then sort of the sales season. So some days are really focused, helping out the sales team to make sure that they have what they need. And then as we sort of gear up towards shows, it's very different. It's making sure we have the team. It's making sure that every piece of content we have has a purpose behind it. It sort of is ever changing.
So let's use Billboard Music Awards as an example, because I know that's coming up for you. So as you head into these type of award shows, I'm sure you're looking at what you did last year and what performed well, but do you kind of go into each show with that blank canvas, like, all right, guys, what's our overall digital strategy and how are we going to attack this event every step of the way?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. We always look back, right? I think I am very, very into sort of data-driven content. I'm very into data-driven strategies, right? I think that's the way in which you can be very successful. So we definitely always have that in the back of our mind. That doesn't mean that for each show, we might have new KPIs, right? So as a company, it might be, hey, X, Y, and Z are super big goals this year. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, you do have that sort of blank canvas where you're creating for slightly different KPIs based off of your key learnings from the previous year. So, it's the process, right, is that I have, a few team members, and we'll sort of have the big picture, think through the big picture strategy behind what we want to do and what we want to accomplish. And as part of that, really think through, like, who's our audience and what do they look like? What do they look like on different platforms? And then we get to give that sort of information to our creative team, and they get to take it and brainstorm what is the actual creative that can hit these different KPIs, hit these different audiences. And then it becomes a sort of very fluid process between the creative and the strategy to make sure we're getting what we need.
I think it's interesting because you've been at Dick Clark since 2013, so you've seen this shift in the industry in a big, big way. Because I'm assuming, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, when you first started at Dick Clark in 2013, how much has it changed in terms of KPI? I'm assuming linear tune-in was by far the most important thing in 2013, and maybe as we head in here to 2018, that's changed. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on kind of how that's changed over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, everything has changed very quickly, and it's sort of ever-changing. I will say that tune-in is sort of inherent to everything we do, right? It's important, and you can't get around that. And I think, like, I've definitely, as a digital social person, really had to teach myself, right, that TV is really important still, right? Yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of, people talk about how TV viewership is declining, and that may be the case, but it's still, even in the demos that are declining the most, it's still the main way in which people are consuming linear content, right? So inherent in everything, there's tune-in. That being said, I think a big change that I really believe in is that we've sort of started not thinking of social and digital as a second screen experience. We think about it as a complementary first screen experience, right? So we create programming not only for sort of the product, right? So like whether it's Instagram stories or live, we also create programming per sort of platform. So we have a run of show for Twitter, we have a run of show for Instagram, we have a run of show for Facebook, and they each are really targeted to who we think our audience is on that platform. That's
awesome. I'll kick it off with this as well. What do you love most about what you do?
Everything. No, I'm so lucky because our department was really small when I started. I have a really wonderful boss, and we were able, I think what's unique about the department is that as I went from working in partnerships to sort of being strictly ops to then being really interested in strategy, and we're able to sort of all have roles that really speak to our strengths. And we had the time to kind of figure out what our strengths were. So I think that at this point, I feel, very lucky that I was able to figure out what I'm actually interested in and now do it within the same department. I think that's pretty rare.
No, I know we've worked together in the past, and not to ego boost you, but you and your department, very impressive staff, and you guys just get it, which I like to say, which I think everybody knows what I mean when I say that. But I want to get a little more granular too. I like what you said there. Not a second screen experience, but more of a complementary and having to run a show for each of these platforms. Can you give me an example of maybe something you've done in the past or things you guys are thinking about in the future, that what that actually means?
Yeah, so it means a lot of different things, right? So I think obviously there's information that needs to be provided across all platforms. So it's not that you would go on Facebook and suddenly you would be having an entirely different narrative, right, from what's actually occurring. It's sort of the way in which the narrative's presented. So, for example, if you had a performer announcement on Facebook, right, you might do a video that is really sort of about the performer, right? We have a slightly older audience on Facebook. Yeah. They're more apt to consume slightly longer video content. So the asset giving that information could be something more trailer-esque, right? On Twitter, you have slightly younger, it's a bit more clickbaity. You have people just want to know what it is, and they'll sort of be engaged long enough. If the content's cool, right, they'll like it, but I don't think they're looking to find out about the performer. They're looking to find out who is this performer, right? So we'll do a sort of different piece of video content that's slightly just more like directly informational, whereas on Facebook, we're doing a bit more of a storyline. Well, then within the video.
Well, then on show day, I'm particularly interested because we've talked about it at length, but you guys have really, in my opinion, best in class when it comes to your red carpet live streams and being able to integrate sponsors into that and really making that an experience A, and then B, like you mentioned, it's a first screen experience. It's not a second screen experience in that regard. So talk about kind of your show day and your live stream, because I think you guys are kind of some of the best in the business at that.
Yeah, so on show day, so live streams, right, we think of sort of unto themselves. The majority of our shows have a pre-show. It's very, very important for our department. It's something that we see not only as, valuable in terms of the content itself, it's also very, very valuable in terms of pushing tune in for the broadcast. I think I love red carpet live streams because you're able to be very creative. Like our department has a lot of control over what we're able to do. You have massive cultural moments happen on them, right? And you're able to be a platform for these moments where talent, it's where they get to talk about anything they're pushing. It's where, people can candidly talk about movements that are super important to them, things like that. So we think of the sort of value of that content as, not necessarily, the same as the main show, but we definitely don't think of it as like, an aside. Generally speaking, we try to always have the red carpet be distributed as a linear live program. I think depending on, if sponsors came in or not, what our goals are for the year, we'll typically have a deal with a distribution partner, which is typically a social platform. Okay. And so we've done them, we've done them with Twitter, we've done them with Facebook. Both have pros, both have cons. And we've also distributed via web. So we've kind of done it all.
And then in terms of brand partnerships, now as we're in 2018, you guys have a few of these under your belt, and they're such high quality productions, specifically on social. How have you guys seen sponsors wanting to be a part of it and kind of package that up to make that something that people want to be a part of?
Yeah, so I think it's compelling, right, for sponsors, because you're able to have, there's a few different ways, right? You can integrate sort of in a small sense where you're just doing something like a quick moment, a bit of a live bit, for lack of a better word. You can have an on-site presence from like a car on the carpet, right? But then since we're controlling the show, you can really capture cool content around that vehicle. And then you can do things like own the entire pre-show, for lack of a better word,
like
right?
Presenting sponsor, essentially, yeah.
Exactly, right? And then in that scenario, you're able to have branding on the interview stages. You're able to have messaging very organically, hopefully, woven throughout the entire program. And so I think that sponsors see it, right, as like a way in which to be very, very tied to the event and front and center without needing to, necessarily make the significant spends that are required for broadcast.
Yeah, and I mean, looking back at 2013, I would assume, I mean, back what I remember too, social would just be a throw-in, like, hey, Coca-Cola, hey, Samsung, you guys are a presenting sponsor for the linear show. We're also going to give you 5 tweets, 6 Instagram posts. Now it seems that sponsors are, more than willing to just be a digital exclusive partner, and actually have that be a package that they are a part of rather than a throw-in. So how have you seen that change over time as well? Social not being just a throw-in, but actually a monetizable thing.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that's exactly right? We used to, it would be, social was coverage of whatever it was that they had actually purchased, right? And theoretically, however you want to package it up. And now we are running social-only programs, obviously not all the time, but it's a possibility. And I think we think of, we think of the content we're creating for the program. We think of, how much content, where's the best place to push it out. We create social content for the brands to utilize. And so I think that brands as a whole, I'm seeing the shift, right? They want to be putting their money on digital and social platforms.
Yeah, I mean, especially I think when they're trying to hit a younger demographic, that's where those people are. So it's starting to make a whole lot of sense. Wanted to get your opinion on how important the performers and presenters for your award shows are to your overall social media success, because I know someone like Cardi B, for instance, got her start kind of on the reality show scene, and now she has a huge following on Instagram. People follow her every day. So how much is that now going into when you guys are looking for presenters or looking for acts on the show?
Yeah, I mean, the talent are everything, right? I think that we definitely do a lot of analysis around their social followings and sort of, how they move the needle by being in the broadcast versus how they move the needle in lead up if we feed them content and they post it. There's talent who, spark mass amounts of conversation. There's talent who have super engaged fan bases who sort of will talk about a lot of things in lead up. So we spend a lot of time and energy creating content for talent, doing outreach to talent. I personally think they're very, very valuable. That's not to say that, we book our shows based off of talent's performance on social, because, the social to broadcast viewer correlation is not perfect.
Right.
But we put a lot of time and energy into them.
But it seems like social has a seat at the table now, because I would assume 10 years ago, obviously, that nobody cared about that. But now that's at least a slight factor in maybe picking one act over the other.
Definitely. Yeah. It's more and more a factor, I think. And which is exciting, right? I think it's pretty great that we're thinking about the talent we book in terms of sort of how relevant they are on the platforms where people are spending so much time. And, we've had influencers who have been presenters, right? And I use the word influencer loosely here because I think obviously everybody theoretically is an influencer, but sort of like digital first influencers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To that point, I want to get your thoughts on the influencer industry. as we sit here today? Because I think we've talked a lot about on this show about bots and a lot about people with fake engagement. Where do you think we're hitting a bubble in a sense with so many different type of influencers and followers that it's tough? Because I think there was a time there where brands knew it was the hot, sexy thing, and they wanted to just throw a bunch of money at it. But then now they're finally asking, wait a second, what's the ROI here, and how valuable actually is this partnership?
Yeah, my personal opinion, right, is I think that sometimes the bubble sort of that I feel is happening is that influencers as personalities versus influencers as distribution outlets, right? And I think that it's sort of been very conflated, and some brands, are very good at it, and choose the personality that also obviously has the reach that really aligns and cares about what they're working on. And then a lot just want sort of whatever audience that person has, right? Which is a little problematic because I don't think the influencers enjoy sort of that relationship. And you have sort of these like very, very expensive posts, right? Because the influencer isn't invested. I think like the influencer relationships that I feel work very, very, very well are when the influencer loves the brand and the brand loves the influencer, right?
It needs to be a genuine relationship in terms of if you're going to speak to your audience about a brand, it needs to be something they actually will enjoy and not.
Yeah, so we've had great, influencers love our shows. We love influencers. We've been able to have super, super successful programs isn't even the right word, right? Because we have relationships with these people. We're able to invite them to our events. We're able to show them sort of like a really high quality experience. And in return, yes, they post about the event, but generally speaking, they'd be doing that regardless, right? So they just get to post about the awesome time they had.
So I wanted to get back a little bit to analytics and how it just kind of fits for the whole run of show, because when you are deciding to make these relationships with influencers, you're deciding to put budget behind certain activations, just how you package all that up, because obviously we're still in this age where it's tough for linear. Who's scrolling on Instagram? Oh, the Billboard Music Awards are on this weekend. I'm going to call my friend. Let's have a party. And they turn it on their TV. You guys can't technically measure that. And I know Nielsen Total Ratings is trying to fix some of that and help out. But how do you guys make those decisions at the table in terms of budget and in terms of should we bring this influencer in to see if that's actually something that's going to help the ROI or the KPI you're trying to hit?
Yeah, it's a tiny bit of a gut check.
Yeah.
But we spend a lot of time researching things, right? I think I have a team who does a lot of analysis from, I guess audience analysis becomes a huge part of it, because if we're talking about potentially bringing in an influencer, you can think about it the same way you would think about that money being utilized as a media spend on a social platform, right? And it kind of, to the point of like a personality versus the network, influencer is valuable because if someone sees that person's face and they like that person, they're going to be interested.
It's a lot more credible than a commercial during. Yeah,
exactly. Right. So I think that it's always a bit of a evaluating process for like how we're going to allocate everything. But I will say that sort of as a whole, everybody understands that digital and social marketing is important and is very, very valuable. And so having the funds to be able to make that happen is very important.
And then how do you guys deal with the ever-changing algorithm changes, especially on Facebook? We've talked about it a lot with a lot of our guests. I'm sure when you see that Digiday post or that Mashable post about how Facebook is changing everything, that really affects your strategy going into an award show a couple months later. So just wondering, I know we're in this age of everything's evolving. You kind of have to move and groove and be flexible. But just from your standpoint, when things like that happen, do you completely shift strategy, or how do you kind of navigate that?
As a whole, I think on Facebook, we sort of paid matters, right? And I think we're just trying to make sure that we always have some budget to do paid posts. Also in part because I think a lot of the people who are following our accounts are following because they're music fans, but a huge segment of the people who turn on the TV are pop culture lovers, right? So we need to be able to reach the pop culture lovers on digital and social. And if they don't follow us, you have to be having some sort of paid spend behind it. And I will say too, I think I've seen a shift on how brands want to be spending their money. I think we're having, with the content we give brands, we're seeing a lot of brands wanting to put paid behind their Facebook posts now.
Just to guarantee that reach and guarantee the demographic they're hitting.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean, the Facebook targeting capabilities are so nuanced that it's great. You can hit exactly who you want to hit.
So in your opinion, there's a lot of people complaining about organic and that being turned down, but it sounds like what you're saying is you not, I guess, enjoy it, but the fact that you can actually guarantee and target and make that more of a analytical equation is actually to your benefit in a lot of areas.
Yeah, in some. I think in general, we just try to not be stressed about it, right? Because these things are ever changing. We have super good partnerships with the platforms, which is another thing. I think we definitely try to utilize the new products that they have, which could potentially sort of help your posts. And we spend a lot of time understanding best practices on the platforms to make sure that our organic content has the highest likelihood to sort of be seen. For example, on Instagram, right? If people are commenting, your post is more likely to do better. But as soon as you say, hey, comment, your post is suddenly bottom of the barrel, right? So you have to create content that somehow sparks the conversation organically. So we definitely have, in general, the sort of platform algorithms inform a ton of our creative.
Awesome. So how do you, I'll ask you this. So what social media software tool do you think you use the most or couldn't live without especially when you're in your live events and things are quick and to the moment? I'm sure you guys have a few things you use that are pretty critical.
Yeah. We use NetBase.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar, but they're great. We're able to do a ton of analysis, in lead up. On show day, we have a live dashboard where we're able to sort of see conversations that are bubbling up, hopefully before, they actually happen. So the example I always use is like it always has to do with people's hair, right? It's like somebody gets out and they have like a top knot or they have blonde, not brown hair. And you're able to get ahead of that so quickly, even before something trends. So NetBase, and then after the show, obviously we use it to be able to analyze, you can get very granular. You can look at how did performers move the needle pre and post? How did presenters move the needle pre and post? What did people like or dislike about your host? Things like that.
That's awesome.
We also obviously,
go ahead,
the industry standard, of course, is sort of Nielsen for ratings. Yep. So Nielsen Social is something we use a lot.
Awesome. So when a new platform or features released, how do you weigh investing time or energy for your team to try that out? I think that's interesting because a lot of stuff is breaking down. You mentioned Facebook, but when Instagram stories came out, and also these different platforms kind of spouting out, when do you, how do you make those decisions, whether you guys should go all in or just kind of wait and see?
We never wait and see. I think it's sort of a shifting of the value proposition, right? So something new is inherently valuable because for our industry, right, being ahead of the times, being on top of what's happening and being cool, right, carries a lot of weight. So if something's new and is rolling out, we're more likely to try it, right? And even if it doesn't end up being down the road something that is a huge moneymaker, or maybe the platform decides it's not working and takes it back, we're more likely probably to use it than to wait and see.
So where do you think in that same realm, where do you think the undervalued attention is right now on social that people may not be appreciating enough?
Well, I know people appreciate them, but I think they should appreciate them more. Instagram stories. Yeah. Instagram stories is the most brilliant thing in the world, right? It's an entirely different, we create original programming for our Instagram stories. We spend a lot of time and energy and, frankly, money to make sure that experience is really, really high quality.
And I always talk about the real estate too. It's still, right when you open your Instagram app, it's still the very top of your app, which they may change that eventually like Snapchat did recently. But the fact that you can be in the front of someone's app every single time they open it, it's just a no-brainer that I agree people don't use enough of. What about Facebook stories though? Because they're trying to roll that out too. And that's still somewhat in the front of your screen or when you open up Facebook.
Yeah. Honestly, we haven't allocated time and effort towards them. I think when we feel sort of from the Facebook team that it's something that they really want us to get behind,
Okay.
we definitely would. I think that they're definitely figuring out exactly how. I mean, now you can upload right from Instagram to
So usually
Facebook
people
too.
just duplicate. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the time and effort is on the Instagram end. I mean, on Instagram too, you can like, there's just interesting things you can do, right? You go live for a little bit, which bumps you to the front of everybody's
That's
scroll,
true
right? You can
too.
be very
Yeah.
strategic about it.
I love that. I love that little tip. So in terms of the core like internal team that you have at DCP, what are the most important roles you see, not so much today, but moving on into the future? Maybe a role that you guys don't even have right now that you foresee in a couple of years that's going to be a big part of what you guys do daily.
It's a good question. I think that I mean, we are content producers, right? We're a production company. So I think that there's some things inherent in that don't change, right? So I think having, a very, very good creative team is super, super important. Having people who really, really understand sort of the social landscape and just everything we've been talking about, right? Everything having to do with like the best way to make content for those platforms is going to become more and more important. I think partnerships, and I use that word can mean a lot of different things, but we have a few people who do, artist relationships with the different social platforms is increasingly important.
I'm always, this is just kind of something I'm interested in, but when it comes to, since you guys do so many shows, you could have a Bruno Mars be on American Music Awards and also be on the Billboard Music Awards. With the artist relations, is there ever like a duo show deal that you guys can work out with the artists that span across multiple properties, or is it always kind of siloed show by show when you do those different things?
It's generally show by show.
Okay.
I mean, I think our talent team has very, very good relationships with the talent, so I'm sure they're talking about everything. Talent have busy schedules. It's really dependent on what the talent are pushing to, right? So like the
Album
AMA,
releases, yeah, all that.
exactly,
Yep.
right? And like the time of year matters. And if they have new music matters, things like that.
Awesome. So what main social network, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. What main social network is the biggest right now in your opinion? We have Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, of course, and Twitter, but it sounds like Instagram you're pretty heavy on right now in terms of engagement.
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time and energy on all the platforms, truly. Like, I think we make sure that there's no platform that sort of has a less good experience on it. But I would say like Instagram is just
best bang for your buck.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Snapchat with Kylie Jenner, Rihanna recently, not having too great PR there, and with their overall OX change that people are not thrilled with. Like I said, when moments like that happen, do you maybe take a little resources away from that and put it somewhere else, or are you still full steam ahead on Snapchat?
We're definitely still spending time and energy on Snapchat. I think that with these, like, Snapchat is a really, really good platform to use as coverage, right? Like on show day, we definitely do stories and we have live stories around our events, but like my story, for example, right, might be a bit more coverage of what's happening rather than have sort of programming the way we would do it for Instagram stories.
That makes sense. I talk a lot about OTT and where we're headed. I think, like you said, more and more younger people, the 18 to 25 demographic are cord cutters, and they're getting a lot of their, entertainment from Netflix and these different live streams that you guys are producing as well. As we head towards the future, how do you see that transition happening? I mean, are we, I don't know, 10 years from now, are some of these shows specifically on Facebook, or is it someone like Amazon coming and maybe being a partner rather than the major four networks? Like, where do you kind of see the award show scene going as an industry?
It's a good question. It's a hard question. I think everybody's sort of spending all their time and energy thinking about it. I think that it's going to be some time before the key networks are not crazy valuable, right? And I think that it's easy as you're sort of very immersed in digital and social to view TV as getting more archaic, but the reality is it's so powerful still. You create, it's the closest you get to like the moon landing moments, right? Yep. Where you have everybody gathered around for one thing, right? And we like to think of our events as these sort of like culturally significant moments where you have this mass gathering, no matter, and really the TV is the unifying element in that, right? Because that's the one thing where you have sort of like the group experience. I do think probably there's going to be a pretty heavy shift towards, digital. It's hard to say if they'll fully just be distributed.
And I think the key is too that who's to say that NBC, ABC, Fox, etc., they can also have those same shows and just go more to OTT. It's not as if it's like Fox or Facebook or Fox or Amazon. Yeah. They're also going to be, and they all have their different platforms and apps that they're trying to push as well from an OTT perspective. I think, once 5G comes out and we continue technology continues to push it, the content is always king, and everybody's always going to want to see their favorite musical artist perform. It's just a matter of exactly where the main distribution will be.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting too, because the value proposition for the talent kind of changes, right? Because they were always on award shows because TV has this massive audience, right? And as that sort of starts to shift, you need to be really thinking through the way in which you're presenting the value to the talent as you're asking them to be a part of the event. You have Rihanna with millions and millions of followers. Like, why does she need our digital presence in order to sort of hit people?
That makes a lot of sense. Well, you mentioned something earlier, which I want to dive into, creating original content on Instagram stories. And I'm wondering, just as DCP, you guys create content and do an amazing job at it. So when it comes to digital exclusives outside of your main pillars and your award shows, how much of that is internally a big KPI or something that you guys are focused on making some original series at Dick Clark on social?
Yeah, so I think that generally when I was talking about original programming, it's leading up to one of our events. So it's coming from sort of the handle and leads up and is sort of a promotional tool, but is in and of itself an interesting, hopefully, thing.
But you're telling that narrative based on what platform you're doing it on, type thing.
Yep, exactly. Okay. So we definitely have people here who are thinking about developing original programming for the different platforms. It's becoming a pretty big priority over here, which is really, really exciting, right? It's fun to think about content that is sort of digital and social first. So I would say increasingly it's something that we're doing.
And I'm sure, something like the Streamies, for instance, tapping into the internet stars, if you will, and some of the influencers, and you guys deciding to go into that business alone, I think proves that you're trying to create original content built around, this more digital atmosphere.
Yeah, I love the Streaming Awards. Everybody should watch it if they haven't. But yeah, I think that generally speaking, we've tried to be really as sort of, kind, and we really value that community, right? We really, really value what they do. We really, really value their skill set and sort of what they're able to create. We think of a lot of them, right, as content creators that we can utilize around many of our events. I think generally speaking, we don't have sort of a marketing program that doesn't somehow use some sort of creator that is a digital first creator, whether that's someone who's an illustrator or whether that's a personality or whether that's, someone who can do super cool paper mache statues, right? Ways to wrap that sort of interesting content into everything we do.
And then how do you guys approach, how many external vendors and teams do you bring in for, these events are so huge, and really it's all about leading up to one day, one tentpole event when it comes to a lot of your different programs. So how many different moving parts are there? How many vendors? How do you guys utilize external teams in that regard?
So many moving parts. Really, I think that was like the biggest learning thing for me coming on here, right? I was like, it's crazy because you're ultimately putting on an event in a pretty short amount of time, right? So yeah, you have a big lead up time, but you're not on site for very many days. So we have a lot of vendors. They do things from, helping make sure the red carpet happens, to running votes we have, to, doing social activations, to everything broadcast, which is a whole nother ballgame. So we use vendors for specific things typically, and then we bring on a quite large team to handle all of the, content creation and publishing and management needs that we have around the event. So anything that we actually as a department come up with that we want to do, we don't typically like to outsource sort of like all of the creative, for example, because that is our bread and butter. So we'll just bring on sort of the necessary people to complement what we're doing.
Simply because you guys don't necessarily need a team of 30, 365 days a year, but on show night, you guys need a huge staff to be able to spike up on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like show week, frankly, we have to staff up a lot.
That's awesome. I think one thing too with Dick Clark that's so impressive is like the way your shows look on linear as well. When you look at the Billboard Music Awards, even recently with the NBA Awards, just everything on television. And I'm not trying to again give an ego boost to you, but honestly, when you look at Billboard Music Awards and you compare it to some other shows that Dick Clark does not do, I think just the intricacies in the set design and the lighting and the LED boards, and I think that also transitions to digital. So. Does that just come from the top down of everything that you guys do needs to be high quality, well thought out? Like how is the overall mood or culture at DCP?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. And I think we're unique, right? In that there isn't...
it seems like you guys don't take shortcuts is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. I mean, even like think about a T-Mobile finale performance, right? Generally speaking, I think when you look at an integration on TV, you're like, cool, they put presented by in front of it. No, there were months and months and months of creative sort of conversations and brainstorms. It doesn't work for X reason, doesn't work for Y reason. Like, even the placement, right, of an integration in the show needs to work creatively. And we take that same sort of mantra all the way through digital and social. So there's, we have to be super, super aware of not alienating our audience, of making sure that sort of everything we do is something that is worthwhile for them to consume. And that goes from it
sounds like you guys just will not just slap a logo on all your winner graphics. Like it has to be a well-branded experience that makes sense for your audience.
Yeah, we take a lot of pride in it, honestly. I think the company does, but I think we hire people who personally take a lot of pride in what they're spitting out.
And it seems like, have you, just respecting the audience, because I think, your followers follow you for a reason. If you're just throwing a bunch of ads in their face or a bunch of logos that don't make sense, that kind of alienates your audience, which it seems like you guys take a lot of pride in.
Yeah, we've done so many tests, right, around like what type of thing do we post that not only maybe gets less engagement, but maybe we drop a few followers. We've done the off-season tests where it's easier to sort of monitor our follower engagement, and they're more likely to unfollow in the off season than they are sort of directly around the event. We do a ton of analysis around sort of the share of voice between brands and editorial content from our different social platforms, because we want to really make sure it's more valuable to the brand if their post is something that is coming at a time when people want to see it, and they're not being overwhelmed.
And then, to your opinion, I know I'm throwing a question that maybe you're not prepared for, but is there one piece of content or series that you felt was the best brand integration that just made sense for your audience, was great original content, but the brand was, inserted into a way that just made sense and it had great engagement?
There's a lot. I think there's definitely.
While you're thinking about it, I will give you, because I know you guys have worked with Casey Neistat before as an influencer, but he just had a recent one that we've talked about a lot is with Samsung. During Christmas, they shut down an entire mall. They made it a winter wonderland. They brought people from Boys and Girls Club, and the whole idea was it was all used on Samsung phones and Samsung equipment. But the actual story and the piece of content, it didn't have to have Samsung involved. It was a good piece of content regardless. So I think those are the things people are always trying to find, is how can we integrate a partner in kind of an organic way that still has a very engaging output.
Definitely. And we're really sensitive to it. Also in terms of making sure that we're not having any implied endorsement issues with talent, right? So inherent sort of in an integration being very organic, obviously there's certain times you need to pay talent, but then, we've done things where every person who's roaming, capturing content is utilizing a Samsung device, right? And then you're able to sort of have powered by Samsung is true. Literally, the content was powered by Samsung. and we're very, very stringent about it, right? It's not like we're fake swapping out iPhones. We were using Samsung devices. And I mean, yeah, so that type of integration is very important.
And then between shows, I'm interested. So obviously leading up to Billboard Music Awards as an example, content continues to get more fierce. Show day, obviously it's insane. I don't know how many pieces of content you guys post in that 24 hours, but I'm sure it's close to 1,000 pieces. What's your guys' strategy in between shows? Because I'm assuming, if we're being honest, a lot of your audience just wants to know about performers. They want to know about the show. But 3 months later, how much Billboard Music Awards content do they want? So how do you guys strategize around that?
Yeah, it's sort of a slightly newer focus for us. We've had a lot of learnings, right? Where if we want to go sort of, say from the Billboard Music Awards account, if we want to go cover the Latin billboards live, right? Which makes sense,
Yep.
obviously. It does sort of matter how you do it, right? Because generally speaking, you're right that our audience really cares about the specific show and then specific talent. So just because we think the Latin billboards is similar, they don't, right? If there's talent that are sort of obvious crossovers between the two events, that is less polarizing than sort of, us live tweeting the entire thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is we need to, because we have so many events, cross promote them, right? Because all our socials have different followers. If you cross promote out of the blue, anyone who sees it is likely to unfollow it. They're like, why am I still following
But somebody
this?
that follows Billboard will probably like what you guys are throwing down for American Music Awards. Similar audiences.
True.
Right.
Maybe they'd be less apt to tune into the Golden Globes, for example.
Right. That makes sense. Yep.
So we've, through sort of trial and error, figured out that if we have a slightly more consistent publishing schedule in the off season, they're more sort of open to the promotional posts that we need to do. So we're coming up with sort of the right way in which to put out content in the off season, but it's definitely like the volume is so much lower than around show.
Speaking of Golden Globes, the Oprah moment. I'm just wondering, inside that room when you guys see that happening, you understand that that's going to be a beast of content once that goes live. So when you guys are in the moment in show and that happens, how do you guys approach that? Is it all hands on deck and just stay with that moment as long as possible? I would just love to go kind of inside baseball in that moment.
Yeah, we definitely knew immediately that it was going to be like the moment,
Yep.
right? I think we were lucky enough to have media on Facebook that I was able to move, and we put a bit behind it, and you have to put so little in that scenario and it goes so far. So in real time, we were able to sort of make those slight adjustments to make sure that
in terms of let's pull
enough
budget and put on this immediately and put some fuel on it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then immediately we were able to source it to her team to post, and get that out. So we definitely tried to put it as wide as possible, but generally speaking, we do that with all of the show moments, right? So the actual sort of output of content doesn't really change if a moment is going to be super, super big. Maybe in the after the show, we'll focus on it a bit more.
But I'm assuming when you get those moments from a digital standpoint, I know when we work on award shows and we work on big events, you're so excited when that type of moment happens, because that can mean an extra 40% in total engagement for the entire show, just that one video potentially. So,
I mean, we went into the Golden Globes with having the Meryl moment the year prior, right? You already have this, we need something.
Yep.
And so it's exciting when those types of things happen. It really is. It was a powerful moment.
So as we kind of wind down here, I'd love to know, just as an industry as a whole, where you see everything going. I know not to predict the future too bad, but you're in it every single day, and you're working with major talent, major influencers, major brands. What are some of the things that you're excited about in the next year, or at least for the rest of 2018, as we continue to try to learn and evolve and do all this stuff in this crazy industry that we live in?
Yeah, I'm excited about a lot of things. Look, I'm excited for another social platform to emerge, right?
Amen.
I don't know if that happens this year. I'm excited for it. When Musical.ly popped up, right, we worked with them immediately. It's exciting when these types of things happen. And, obviously sort of going up against the giants is never easy, but you don't necessarily have to go up against them. You just have to be doing something different and something unique. I'm really excited to see sort of how brands start to value, or how the shift is going to happen of where they want to be spending their money, right? I think we're so in it and we're experiencing it all the time, and we're sort of living it right now, and it's going to shake out a little bit of how they're sort of wanting to deal with TV versus not TV, and how they get sort of more nuanced around the audience that's on TV versus the audience that's on social, and if they start to value one higher than the other. And then in general, I think seeing sort of where distribution is going as a whole is super exciting and super interesting, and something that is going to be sort of a long ride, but fun to be part of.
Yeah, I'm so with you on I think there's an opening right now for a platform to come up and grab a hold of the moment, just because, I mean, Facebook with the whole election and everything, they've decided we want nothing to do with news and organic. I think there's also an opening for Twitter or Snapchat, but I agree. I think there's an opening right now for a new platform to come out of nowhere, or a current one to really be able to challenge the main four, because once there's a potential to go get to something early, soak up organic engagement before they go public and before it's all about the ad revenue, I think that's what, you and I are trying to find every single day.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's a lot of interesting things that you can happen. You look at like even a Spotify, right, which isn't a social platform, but they're suddenly curating playlists, and playlists have suddenly become a currency, right? And everybody, you make or break a song by its placement in one of their playlists, right? And there's these sort of different formats that are coming out and changing the industry, right? And that opens a lot of sort of room on the social end for a platform.
And I think one thing we always forget to talk about, because there's always Twitter, Facebook, Snap, Instagram, but YouTube. And I know YouTube is a big part of what you guys do as well, but it's Google obviously, and it's top 5 in as far as websites search on the internet. So for YouTube as well, like how do you think there's an opening for them as well to become more of a player?
Yeah, I think we think of YouTube in part as it's like the search first find, right? On Facebook, you can find content. On YouTube, you search for content. So we've had phases where we've spent more or less time on YouTube. I think with sort of the excitement around Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat, we put a lot of content on it. It hadn't always been a huge strategy focus for us. More and more, it's becoming a strategy focus, because you need the people immediately after the event. What do? You want to see a performance, you want to see acceptance speech, you search it on YouTube. So more and more, I think we're going to start to focus efforts to make sure that the YouTube experience and there's unique content there.
I will say, as one of your viewers, I recently searched the Pitbull Chris Brown performance from a few years ago at Billboard. So those are the moments where that was a dope performance. I want to watch that again. I'm automatically going to YouTube hoping that you guys have uploaded it, and you're probably hoping some random person didn't upload the bad quality version, so you guys want to soak that engagement up. So that totally makes sense. Well, overall, I really appreciate your time. I think it's been a brilliant conversation and provided a lot of value for the listeners. What's next for you? What are you excited about for DCP, and what are you working on currently?
We have the Billboard Music Awards coming up, and we have the Academy of Country Music Awards coming up. So what's next is those two shows. I feel like everyone's like, we just made it through award show season, and I'm like, no, but it just kicks off again. So yeah, our heads are very, very much in planning for those two events.
And then while I have you, how far in advance do you go for those shows? And when they overlap like that, it's just a matter of prioritizing different things for both shows. I mean, I'm sure it's tough to juggle a couple shows at the same time.
Yeah, I think everything's a priority. So it's mostly making sure there's enough hours in the day. Generally, the nominations happen, 4 to 6 weeks out from the event. And there's a lot of, obviously, there's, say, like a month's worth of prep prior to nominations, loosely ballparking. Yeah. So we have a lot of overlap, and you just have to find the time and hire staff, pretty much.
That's what I always say to the people that we end up hiring too. Like, you have to geek out over this industry because it is tough. Yep. I know you personally have worked those 14 days in a row. You've worked those, 18, 20-hour days. I think you would probably agree. And unless you love entertainment and love social and love this industry, it'd be very difficult to wake up every morning and deal with all the craziness that you go through. Yeah.
100%. You have to, there's a rush to it, right? Live events, it's crazy. There's
Adrenaline. Yep.
nothing like it. I honestly, it's crazy even the number of hours you can stay up. Uh, yeah, you have to love it. You really do.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm looking forward to talking and meeting up with you soon, but I think it's been really good. And thanks for joining us on the Business of Social.
Yeah, of course. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Maddy. Talk soon. There she is, Maddie Mesevage from Dick Clark Productions. Super interesting conversation to break down as she is in the live event space. And I think digital and social, there's no real more important industry to know your game and be able to capitalize on brand integration and sponsors, but also at the same time, being able to capitalize on the moments. Like we all think about that Oprah moment at the Golden Globes, and we all saw it and talked about it around the water cooler, but that was her team that was able to get that into a viral moment, essentially, when it came to the different social platforms. But they're a really impressive bunch of Dick Clark Productions. We've worked with them in the past, but also just being kind of a fan of them from afar. They just do it right on digital. I think they're first to market when it comes to, like she mentioned, jumping on the organic train when it comes to Facebook Live or Facebook Watch or Instagram Stories. They're always first to market. They're always playing around in those spaces. And I really like what she said. I totally agree that I think there's an opening right now. If Twitter wants to step up to the plate, I think they have an opportunity as well. But if not, there's also, I think, an opening in our space for a new social media network to come up and really soak up that organic engagement that people really want to get, especially with all the different changes with the algorithm and things like that. So super interesting conversation. Make sure to check out Dick Clark and all that they do, especially when it comes to their live streams. It's high quality. It's just as well produced as a linear production. There's great brand sponsorship integration. So if you guys out there are looking for your live streaming capabilities and how to integrate sponsors the right way, I suggest you go over there to what Dick Clark's doing, especially with their pre-show events. It's very impressive stuff, and definitely recommend what they're doing. Of course, I'm David Brickley. You can always email me. I answer every single email, david@st.digital. If I can ever do anything for you, or I can help you in any way, or hop on a call, or go over some case studies, or give you guys some advice, I'm always here for you. Once again, david@st.digital. I want to shout out my producers, David Furker, Auntie Lightning, and of course, Sam Howard. Thank you so much. Thank you to Maddie. I appreciate it. We'll see you guys next time on the Business of Social.